I remember, first of all, I arrived there around August, mid-August, and the whole landscape looked like a golf course. I was struck immediately by how green everything was in Michigan as compared to Utah, which is the desert, obviously. So that was really exciting. And then it was cool going into all these little towns. It's very different than the Salt Lake Valley, where everything is all kind of compiled together within the valley. There are a lot more, the towns are separated. And I remember my first city that I went to was called Bay City, Michigan. And I nicknamed it the City of Churches just because on every corner there was some sort of cathedral or some sort of big old Gothic looking Catholic church with bells and towers and everything. And it was really cool. And there was a whole variety of different churches and representing different faiths. Utah, obviously, it's predominantly Latter-day Saint, and so you have an LDS church on every corner, as they say. But out there, it was cool to see a variety of different denominations, which struck me right off the bat. I honestly don't know a whole lot about the history of the mission itself or the boundaries of the wards or anything like that. I know Michigan is predominantly Anglo-Saxon, so mostly English-speaking missionaries, and then you also have a lot of there are a few places where there's a heavier Hispanic demographic, and so there were a lot of Hispanic or Spanish-speaking missionaries as well. I served in a companionship once where my companion was from Tijuana, Mexico, and I'm obviously not. And so he spoke Spanish, or he taught people who spoke Spanish as their first language, and I spoke mostly with people who speak English, and that was in Sturgis, Michigan. I think it's like 30% Hispanic down there or something, which is surprising in the North Midwest. But yeah, and then there's the Detroit Temple that everybody usually goes to. It's kind of cool because in Utah, again, to draw a comparison, in Utah we have a lot of LDS temples to do temple work in, whereas in Michigan, it's cool how for the people there, it's I guess more of a novelty to go visit a temple just because it's a longer drive. And prior to the Detroit temple, I think they would actually have to go to the Washington, D.C. temple. So it's kind of cool to see the faith of people that are willing to go that far to do temple work. It was just Michigan, like the northern half of Michigan. I served in a lot of coastal towns, which was really cool, and it was kind of something I was looking forward to. Fun fact, Michigan has the greatest number of lighthouses of any state in America, which is kind of neat. And I actually got to see a few really neat lighthouses on my mission, take some cool pictures. Obviously, the weather is pretty extreme there. Like during the summer, it's very humid, which is different than Utah. And riding around in a bike with a suit on or with like even a white shirt on, you get pretty nasty and look pretty unflattering to the people that you knock into. However, during the winter, it's just the opposite. I remember I served in a place called Charlevoix, which is on an isthmus, which is like a narrow strip of land. The one that comes to mind is Istanbul in Turkey. It was between two huge lakes, and really cool little liberal town. A lot of little coffee shops and art galleries and things like that. It would get to be about negative 20 degrees there in the mornings, which there's cold, and then there's negative 20 degrees cold, which is pretty astonishingly, awesomely cold, especially when your car breaks down right in the middle of a snowy street and you have to shovel yourself out at 6 in the morning. Not that that ever happened, but yeah, it happened. So yeah, that's kind of I guess a general feel of Michigan. I also served in Battle Creek, which is in the southern part of Michigan. It's funny because the southern part of Michigan has more of a Midwest feel. And like there's a lot of farming that goes on. However, the northern part of Michigan has more of feels more like Canada or something like that. It's heavily wooded, little towns everywhere, kind of Duck Dynasty-esque culture there. But in Sturgis, it was more like, had more of an urban feel, had a lot of urban blight, I would say, a lot of foreclosed homes because of the economy and how Michigan was hit. And so it's interesting how much variety you have, or how much cultural differences you have across the state of Michigan. It was in the winter of 2009, or like 2008, 2009. I was in Charlevoix, Michigan, which is in the north, like it's like here-ish, like across the lake from Canada, basically. And I described in a letter, well, in a letter I wrote home, I compared it to Dante's Inferno. In Dante's Inferno, Dante, the poet, describes how the ninth circle of hell is not full of fire and brimstone. It's actually a lake of ice where Satan has these huge wings flapping and causing perpetual blizzards and stuff like that. And while to make it perfectly clear that that is not consistent with Latter-day Saint, with canonized Latter-day Saint doctrine, just in an aesthetic sense, that was definitely what Charlevoix was like during the wintertime. Holy cow. Yeah, you couldn't. I remember one day there was this thing called an ice storm. Apparently the Midwest gets ice storms, which I don't know from what, like it's like they've blown down from Pluto or something like that to go create like an inch of ice on everything in sight, your car, your door handle, everything. And watch out, because yeah, if you can't take a single step without slipping and falling. And that leads, of course, to a lot of really embarrassing moments, which I do not feel the need to go into. But another crazy incident was in this place called East Jordan, which is just south of Charlevoix. There was what's called a whiteout, which is basically just like it sounds, so much snow in the air and on the ground that it looks like a blank piece of printer paper in front of you. You can't see or distinguish anything. And so we were driving in this, and I was barely like having the glance of the top, or glancing at the top of a truck that was in front of us, just to know that we weren't like in the middle of nowhere or like in utter oblivion. And there was a moment, like, because you couldn't see anything, and there was a moment where for 10 seconds or so, the top of that truck vanished into the blizzard. And I was driving I could not see a thing. I literally couldn't see. I might as well have been wearing blinders because of all the whiteness in front of my car. And that was scary. That was a new strata of fear, I think, in terms of driving that I had never experienced. So yeah, crazy weather up there. Battle Creek, first off, is the cereal capital of the United States. The main factories of Kellogg's and Post are both in Battle Creek. And so that's where they make the cereal, like Cocoa Puffs and stuff like that. And so when you wake up in the morning and you walk out on the balcony, you can actually smell whatever cereal they're making that morning. Whether, like I said, like Cocoa Puffs or whatever other cereal is being made that day, and it just permeates the air, and it's really neat. Also, there's this. I think Battle Creek is where the Seventh-day Adventist Church began. I don't. I'd have to like check my my solid Wikipedia facts in order to verify that. But there are some really cool buildings there, including this one building called the Sanatorium, which is this creepy kind of turn of the century Gilded Age building. It looks like the Tower of Terror in Disneyland, and it's really cool and kind of like I said, kind of has a creepy feel to it. All of Battle Creek kind of had like a gothic feel in a way, just because of the time of year that I was there. It was like in February-ish, and so all the trees were black from the rain, and the slush filled the streets. And I remember, and all the trees were kind of leafless and dead, and a lot of the houses, as I mentioned before, were foreclosed, and so there was a lot of urban decay throughout the more densely packed parts of the city. And it looked like all the buildings were abandoned. That was the weird thing. Obviously they weren't, but there are these two kind of ghastly looking skyscrapers there, taller buildings that I remember, that look like North Korea or something like that. Just not a lot of, I don't remember there being a lot of life to the city. Although, except when the weather warmed up, obviously, like when it got in like the 60s, because in Michigan, you know, it's so cold there during the winter that when it gets to like in the 50s, temperature wise, people are in their t-shirts. But I remember one day it was 68 degrees in the middle of winter. And all of a sudden, everybody just came out of the woodwork. All the families kind of they'd sit out on their porches. And it's funny because, again, compared to Utah, I mean, maybe in some places, but in Draper, people just kind of, like, you have your yard and your kids playing in the yard maybe, but you don't have like this huge family camped out on the porch doing whatever they're doing and just kind of watching you as you go by. And I stood out like a sore thumb. So yeah, it was an interesting and cool place. I really liked it. I'm under the impression that there's a lot of crime there. I know, like, at least more than Draper, Utah, that's for sure. I know there's talk of a lot of gang activity there and everything, but I mean, as missionaries, we have a curfew. We have to be inside by 9 p.m. And there's two of us, so we just never really, I don't feel like I encountered a whole lot of that firsthand. I'm sure like a lot of missionaries may have had experiences, especially missionaries in Detroit. I know I had a buddy who got jumped or something like that, but I got the impression that people like recognized that, like, we had we had suits on with our missionary name tags, and it seemed like people were inclined to leave us alone, just knowing that we were church with the church and everything. Nice. Battle Creek is known as Little Detroit, just because it's in between Chicago and Detroit. And so, yeah, there's I guess a more diverse demographic there. Listening is so much more productive in certain contexts. And I remember just when dealing with people, like when I first started off on my mission, I kind of had my speech prepared about the gospel and about you know, how, you know, you all need to go join the church and be baptized and look to Christ, who's your Redeemer. And I mean, it's a great message. And I mean, I just described how wonderful of a message it is earlier. But sometimes the most eloquent sermon could actually be counterproductive if a person that you're trying to minister to has something really pressing on their mind that they want to get out, or they have a really important question that's maybe plagued them for several years. And if you're just kind of being naive and belligerent and kind of preaching at them without maybe like paying close attention to their expression, to kind of their body language, like if they maybe have something that they want to say, then I don't think you'll facilitate the type of experience that leads somebody to feel God's presence. And that's true conversion. Like, as missionaries are, and it's funny because I'm in sales now, and so like as a salesman, We learn various sales strategies to employ to, I guess, lead people to buy our product, right? With the gospel or with missionary work, it's very different. You're not there to persuade or convince anybody about anything. You are there to, I guess, be, the conduit through whom God can, I guess, reveal his face to them. I know that's really abstract. Maybe a different way of putting it is to use the word facilitate again, you're there to facilitate a spiritual experience for the person who's investigating the church, because having that tangible spiritual experience oftentimes whether subtle or dramatic, leads people to pursue a direct personal relationship with God that will land them in the waters of baptism, rather than just taking your word for it. I was always kind of a goody two-shoes kid. Like, I was seminary president and all that stuff in high school. And so gaining a testimony, like, I'd already gained my testimony that the gospel was true before my mission. However, obviously, as it tends to be the case, a lot of different obstacles came up before I left, and just different, I guess, hard things happened. Like, I had a really horrible freshman year, and then also, like, right in the months leading right before my actual mission, my girlfriend dumped me, my high school girlfriend and everything. That was really, like, oh no, that's the end of the world when you're 19. And then also my parents were on the verge of divorce as well, which I just found out. And so just everything was kind of falling apart around me at the time in my little teenage world. And so it was kind of a leap of faith to leave all that behind and go out into a completely new world. But I remember I was driving to Draper from Provo one day, and it was a storm outside the car, I remember, and lightning everywhere. And I remember looking up on a billboard, and there was a George Eliot quote. It was, "It's never too late to be what you might have been." And despite my feelings of inadequacy at that time in my life, I just remember, or I saw that quote and I immediately thought about serving a mission and going out there to really devote myself to something bigger than myself and worthwhile, and serving God. And so off I went. 2 words of advice I would offer. The first one is be yourself. I'm a really artsy person. I write poetry, and when I got called to Michigan, I pictured NASCAR and like hunting and all that stuff, and thought, like, whoa, who are you sure it's me? But I decided to be myself. A friend of mine gave me that advice, and I didn't try to pretend to be something I wasn't to make people like me. And everybody just ended up liking me just fine. And we all, I really gained a second family out there. And people can tell if you're being genuine, whether you're bearing your testimony of the gospel and preaching, or just, socializing at dinner. People can sense if you're being fake. The other piece of advice would just be to lose yourself in the mission, especially in the individual lives of the people you're serving. Because if you lose yourself in your mission, you'll be infinitely happier than if you still cling to things that are going on back home. By losing yourself in your mission, I mean, you get to a point where your prayers and your thoughts and your thoughts as you lie in your bed awake deal with the lives and the struggles of the people you're serving. And you identify with them, and you weep with them, and you laugh with them, and you go to their kids' baseball games and stuff like that. And when you get to that point, that's when you experience the fullest happiness and get the greatest results and get the most permanent blessings. Usually they take the form of lifelong friends and a second family that will show up at your wedding someday. And you owe it to yourself to be a missionary when you are a missionary for the 2 years. Don't wimp out. Be the guy that wakes up early and that actually goes and knocks the first door, because you only have 2 years. Nobody on the mission is going to see you, like none of these strangers that you encounter and that you try to approach them in a park or something like that about the church are going to see you again, or that none of them care who you are. And so you can afford to make mistakes and to just put yourself out there because you have nothing to lose. But though it seems like a long time, it's not a long time. And you'll either spend the rest of your life thinking fondly about your mission and feeling a sense of pride and accomplishment, or feeling regret and uncertainty. It'll trail after you as, people interview about your mission like this, or, kids, like younger kids in your ward ask you about your mission. Serve a real, or just put all your heart into the mission, and don't withhold no sacrifice, to quote Winston Churchill. I had roadkill one time. Yeah, I think this really cool family had actually hit a deer with their van. And one time, my companion and I, his name was Elder Dustin, and he was an incredible cook, Idaho farm boy, and just, man, the guy could marinate a steak. And he also wanted to make German pancakes one morning, which his German pancakes, like, there must be, like, I know we believe in 3 degrees of glory, but like, or of heaven, but it must be kind of just shy of the top one, the German pancake Elder Dustin experience. Anyway, so I was stoked, and we just decided, we got up super early and we're going off to get some eggs. And as we drove out, we pulled out of the apartment complex and just got nailed by an oncoming truck. And I still remember his eyes the size of hubcaps as we were spinning around. And I guess that was obviously pretty crazy. We became German pancakes that morning, and nobody got hurt, of course. But after that, we had to ride these classic or these vintage Schwinn bikes provided by the branch president in the area. And since he's a big guy, he wrestled, and he was like 275 pounds at the time and about 5'10" or so. So big dude. And I made him ride the girl bike because he caused the car accident. And so it was funny as we were riding these little bikes along for miles, seeing him in front. So yeah, that was pretty interesting and funny. One time we rode our little bikes to an Indian powwow, or a Native American powwow, out in the middle of the forest. And we were out, typical powwow scene, like you'd have all these booths selling native southwestern jewelry and little spears and cool paraphernalia like that, and people were doing this big old rain dance, and you had a combination of Native Americans in full traditional attire and some, like, a bunch of white people from Oscoda, Michigan. And it was actually really interesting. I'm not saying this was actually like this took literal effect or anything like that, but I kid you not when I say the craziest rainstorm that I've ever experienced all of a sudden just burst down upon us, like coincidentally shortly after this dance, and literally flooded the whole scene. I don't think that they meant to make it rain that hard with their dance, but because everybody had to pack up everything after that, and we had to ride our bikes through that. And so that was a true test of manhood right there. But besides cooking the most epic microwavable chimichangas, um, let's see, I learned how to, like, I guess, kind of play with kids and stuff. I know that's kind of weird, but like, I have a sister who's 12 years younger than me, and so for the first 12 years of my life, and then my other sisters live in other states, and so for the first 12 years of my life, I was an only child, and so I didn't have a ton of experience with like younger brothers and sisters being right there to play with and engage and entertain and all that. And so I think I was kind of a little awkward about that, like about playing with dogs and playing with kids when I went on my mission. I think I maybe thought I was going to break something. And I remember there's a town called Lanesburg, and there are these families, the Hatts and the Walters, who all had like tons of little kids everywhere, and you know, toys strewn about and a trampoline and all that. And like, I had a companion whose name was Elder Little, who was ironically 6'6" and about 230 pounds. Not so little, but he was great with kids, and he'd like dress up in the Spider-Man hat or whatever and go play with the kids. And I was a little like uptight because, you know, I was a official church representative and was not going to condescend to, you know, be goofy like that. But eventually I just kind of softened up, and I think like that's important. You know, you don't want to be a like you don't want to be a stiff corporate guy, like sermon vending machine when you're on your mission. You have to be a human being, because that's what people identify with. And there's a reason God doesn't send some stoic angel to come down and declare the gospel to us. You know, he sends 19-year-old boys and girls of the same age, you know, who don't know anything about the world, but who like nonetheless can, I guess, touch people's hearts with the gospel. And I think, yeah, so I guess learning how to just kind of lighten up a little bit and kind of loosen my tie, I think, was an important lesson for my mission, which is ironic because I think it's the opposite for most people. Like, missions straighten out a lot of people, I think. So, yeah. One of my best friends ended up getting, or he was, we all kind of had our little group of friends in Oscoda, Michigan, and we, you know, on our day off, we'd go hang out on the beach and throw the frisbee around, and we got really close. And one of these friends, he was from Oscoda, ended up getting sent to prison. He had somehow, in some silly, like, I think he had, I don't know, he was just 19 or so, or he was really young. And I think he had somehow violated his parole on accident, you know, or just without maybe thinking it through. And he ended up going to prison for 3 years because of it. And he was one of my best friends, and that was really difficult at the time. And especially, like, we visited him in jail prior to his incarceration, or in prison, and, like, you know, it's just, I mean, like I said, I grew up in Draper, Utah, so most of my friends were goody two-shoes, AP nerds, myself among them. And like, yeah, like, wow, one of my best friends is in prison and is trapped. And so that really sucked for everybody. We were really sad. And kind of just like the quote I said earlier in the interview, the George Eliot quote, it's never too late to be what you might have been. Maybe you were perfect in high school and everything like that. Maybe not, but a mission is an adventure that you can't really get in any other in any other way. And I realize the purpose is to lead people to Christ, and so that ought to be your central piloting purpose. But I mean, it's also a great adventure, and it's where you earn your stripes. It's where you, I guess, discover who you are, like who you really are, outside of the context of your upbringing. Because we kind of, like with our, between our parents and our friends and our teachers growing up, we develop a self-perception based on what people tell us about ourselves. But on your mission, you discover that afresh. You discover, I guess, the raw, intuitive self through really refining experiences. Find something to do, like find something meaningful to occupy your time quickly, because the mission instills such great habits. Like, you have this structured time. You wake up and read your scriptures for 2 hours, which is a long time, obviously, but you go out and you work, and then at 9 o'clock you cash in and you go to bed at 10:30, and you wake up at 6:30 the next morning. Those are great, like, life habits. That's a great routine to follow. And you live, by the way, you live on $150 a month of food. And so, like, you learn to really budget and such. And so, yeah, just if you like find a job or go to school the second you get back, don't take a break or anything. You don't need a break, because if you do, then all these habits you've developed might unravel, and you'll go back to your old self. So, and just like, I don't know, just kind of like, just don't forget God. Don't forget the God you became acquainted with, out in who knows where corner of the earth, because he's there, and he still has, you're still a missionary. You still, like, I mean, if we believe what we teach, like, this whole life is kind of a mission in effect. Like the mission is a formal proselyting mission for those 2 years, but after that, we still have a purpose, and we still have a cause that we need to uphold. And so just remember that you have a purpose in life, not just as a missionary.